The afternoon sun filtered through the tall windows of the county courthouse, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floors. Judge Robert Wilson had been presiding over family court cases for over 2 decades, but nothing could have prepared him for what was about to unfold in his courtroom that day. In the back of the courtroom sat Amy Chen, a dedicated social worker who had spent the last 6 months working with a bright-eyed 7-year-old boy named Danny. The child had been living in foster care since his mother's unfortunate passing the previous year, while his father, Tom Richards, had been serving overseas in the military. The case before the court that day was meant to be routine, another step in the process of determining Danny's permanent placement. The boy's elderly grandmother had been fighting for custody, arguing that she could provide the stability he needed. However, there were concerns about her ability to care for an energetic young child given her age and health conditions. What nobody in the courtroom knew was that Tom had finally returned from his deployment. After months of paperwork, delays, and bureaucratic hurdles, he had been desperately trying to reconnect with his son. The system, however, seemed to work against him at every turn. As Judge Wilson prepared to hear arguments about Danny's placement, the heavy wooden doors of the courtroom suddenly burst open. The sharp sound echoed through the chamber, causing everyone to turn in surprise. There, standing in the doorway, was Danny, his small chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. Before anyone could react, 2 words escaped his lips, words that would change everything: "Daddy's home." The silence that followed was deafening. Then, from behind Danny emerged a tall figure in military fatigues, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. Tom Richards had made it home, and nothing would keep him from his son any longer. Judge Wilson, who had seen countless family reunions in his courtroom, found himself momentarily speechless. This wasn't just another case number or file on his desk, this was a moment of pure, unscripted joy that reminded everyone present why they had chosen to work in family court. Danny's social worker, Amy, couldn't help but smile through her own tears. She had known about Tom's return but had kept it secret, working behind the scenes to help facilitate this reunion. She watched as Danny ran to his father, who scooped him up in a tight embrace that spoke of months of separation and longing. As father and son held each other, the grandmother, Mrs. Richards, slowly approached them. Her earlier objections melted away as she watched her son and grandson reunite. She realized that what Danny needed most wasn't just stability, it was the love of his father. The courtroom, usually a place of solemn proceedings, erupted in spontaneous applause. Even the usually stoic bailiff was seen wiping away a tear. Judge Wilson, after taking a moment to compose himself, called for order in the court, though his voice carried a warmth that hadn't been there before. What followed was unprecedented in Judge Wilson's career. Instead of continuing with the planned custody hearing, he listened as Tom presented his case. The soldier spoke of his love for his son, the pain of being separated during deployment, and his plans for their future together. He had already secured a house near Danny's school and had arranged for family support during any future deployments. The grandmother, seeing the determination and love in her son's eyes, withdrew her petition for custody. Instead, she offered to help Tom raise Danny, creating a support system that would benefit everyone involved. Amy Chen, the social worker, presented her recommendation for immediate family reunification, citing the strong bond between father and son that had endured despite their separation. Judge Wilson, known for his careful deliberation, made one of the quickest decisions of his career. He granted immediate custody to Tom, with provisions for grandmother's visitation rights and continued support from social services during the transition period. As the judge signed the final papers, he couldn't help but reflect on how this case would stay with him forever. In a system often criticized for its cold efficiency, today had brought a reminder of the very human stories at the heart of every case. Danny and Tom left the courthouse hand in hand, with Mrs. Richards following close behind. The afternoon sun still streamed through the windows, but now it seemed brighter somehow, illuminating a new beginning for a family reunited against all odds. That evening, as Judge Wilson prepared to leave his chambers, he found a crayon-drawn picture on his desk. It showed 3 stick figures, a tall one in green, a small one in blue, and an older one in purple, all holding hands. At the bottom, in wobbly letters, it read, "Thank you for letting my daddy come home." The judge carefully placed the drawing in his briefcase. In 20 years on the bench, he had presided over thousands of cases, but few had reminded him so powerfully of the real impact his decisions had on people's lives. This was why he had become a judge in the first place, not for the law itself, but for the lives that could be changed when justice and compassion worked together. The first few weeks of Danny and Tom's reunion were filled with both joy and adjustment. Their new house, while modest, felt like a palace to Danny, who had spent the last 6 months moving between temporary homes. His bedroom, painted a soft blue with glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling, quickly became his sanctuary. Tom found himself navigating the unfamiliar waters of full-time parenthood. The military had taught him discipline and organization, but raising a 7-year-old required a different kind of strength. Simple tasks like making school lunches and helping with homework became new missions to master. Grandmother Richards, or Nana, as Danny called her, proved invaluable during this transition. She would come over 3 times a week, teaching Tom her special recipes that Danny loved and helping establish routines that worked for their new family dynamic. Her presence helped bridge the gaps in Tom's parenting knowledge, while allowing her to be an active part of their lives. One particularly challenging evening, Tom found himself facing a situation no military training had prepared him for, Danny's first nightmare since moving in. The boy's screams pierced the quiet house around midnight, sending Tom running to his son's room. He found Danny tangled in his sheets, tears streaming down his face. "I dreamed you were gone again," Danny whispered as Tom held him close. "Like Mommy." Tom's heart clenched at those words. He had missed so much of his son's life, including helping him process the loss of his mother. "I'm here now, buddy," he said softly, running his hand through Danny's hair. "And I'm not going anywhere." That night marked a turning point in their relationship. Tom realized that beyond providing a home and basic necessities, his son needed emotional security. The next day, he started a new tradition. Every evening before bed, they would sit together in Danny's room and share 3 good things that happened that day, no matter how small. Amy Chen, their social worker, continued to check in regularly. During one visit, she couldn't help but notice the transformation in both father and son. The house had taken on a lived-in feel, with Danny's artwork covering the refrigerator and family photos lining the walls. One picture particularly caught her eye, Danny and Tom at a local baseball game, both wearing matching team caps and huge smiles. "You've created something special here," Amy observed during her visit. "Danny seems more settled than I've ever seen him." Tom nodded, watching through the window as Danny played catch with the neighbor's kid in their small backyard. "We're learning together," he replied. "Some days are harder than others, but we're figuring it out." The challenges weren't just emotional. Tom had to learn to balance his job at the local veterans center with Danny's school schedule. The solution came from an unexpected source, their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Park, a retired teacher who offered to watch Danny after school until Tom got home. Mrs. Park's involvement turned out to be a blessing beyond mere childcare. She helped Danny with his homework and introduced him to the joy of gardening. Together, they planted a small vegetable garden in the backyard, giving Danny a sense of responsibility and accomplishment as he watched his plants grow. One afternoon, while tending to their tomato plants, Danny asked Mrs. Park a question that had been weighing on his mind. "Do you think my mom can see me from heaven?" Mrs. Park, with her gentle wisdom, took a moment before responding. "I believe she can see every tomato you plant, every homework problem you solve, and every time you make your father smile. She's watching you grow into an amazing young man." The conversation made its way back to Tom through Mrs. Park, leading him to realize it was time to create a special place in their home for Danny's mother's memory. Together, they set up a small photo corner in the living room, featuring pictures of Danny's mom and items that had belonged to her. It became a place where Danny could feel connected to her while embracing his new life with his father. The community around them continued to show support in various ways. Danny's teacher, Mr. Johnson, took extra time to help him catch up on schoolwork he had missed during the transitions. The local veterans group, where Tom worked, organized a furniture drive when they learned the family needed basic household items. Even Judge Wilson, who had presided over their case, would occasionally run into them at the local diner and always made time to chat with Danny. As summer approached, bringing warmer weather and longer days, Tom noticed a significant change in his son. The quiet, uncertain boy from the courtroom had blossomed into a more confident child who laughed easily and made friends quickly. Danny's nightmares became less frequent, and his drawings, once filled with dark colors and lonely figures, now featured bright scenes of family activities and future dreams. One evening, as they sat on their small front porch enjoying ice cream cones, Danny looked up at his father with serious eyes. "Dad," he said, his voice thoughtful, "are you happy we're together now?" Tom felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Happier than I've ever been, buddy," he replied honestly. "Having you here makes everything better." Danny nodded, seemingly satisfied with this answer. "Me too," he said simply, before returning his attention to his rapidly melting ice cream. In that moment, Tom realized that sometimes the biggest victories come in the smallest moments, in ice cream on a warm evening, in homework completed together, in nightmares soothed, and in the simple knowledge that they were exactly where they were meant to be. As autumn painted the neighborhood trees in brilliant shades of red and gold, Danny faced one of his biggest challenges yet, the school talent show. For weeks, he had watched his classmates sign up, each with their own special act to perform. Some would dance, others would sing, and a few planned elaborate magic tricks. "I don't have a talent," Danny confided to his father one evening during their nightly sharing time. His eyes were fixed on his bedspread, fingers nervously playing with a loose thread. Tom, who had been sitting in his usual spot on the edge of the bed, felt his heart ache at his son's words. "Everyone has talents, buddy. Sometimes we just need help discovering them." The next day, Tom reached out to their growing support network. Mrs. Park suggested gardening demonstrations, while Nana recommended cooking. But it was Mr. Johnson, Danny's teacher, who struck gold when he mentioned that Danny had a natural gift for storytelling. During show and tell, Mr. Johnson explained, Danny captivates the entire class. The way he describes things makes everyone feel like they're right there with him. This observation sparked an idea. Tom remembered the journal they had started keeping together, documenting their journey since reuniting. Each evening, they would write down a memory, a hope, or a funny moment from their day. These pages held their story, a story of love, separation, and reunion. When Tom suggested turning their journal entries into a performance piece, Danny's eyes lit up for the first time since the talent show was announced. Together, they began crafting their story, carefully selecting moments that captured their journey. Mrs. Park helped them practice projection and timing, while Nana sewed Danny a special vest for the performance. The day of the talent show arrived with butterfly-filled stomachs and last-minute jitters. The school gymnasium was packed with parents, teachers, and students. Tom sat in the front row, next to Nana and Mrs. Park, all of them wearing matching Team Danny buttons that Amy Chen had surprised them with. When Danny's turn came, he walked onto the stage with steady steps, though Tom could see his hands trembling slightly. The boy took a deep breath, just as they had practiced, and began, "This is a story about 2 words that changed everything." As Danny shared their story, his voice grew stronger. He spoke about missing his dad, about the day in the courtroom, about their new home and family traditions. The gymnasium fell silent, every person hanging on his words. Even the restless kindergartners in the back stopped fidgeting. When Danny reached the part about their nightly sharing of 3 good things, his voice cracked slightly. "Today," he said, looking directly at his father, "I have more than 3 good things to share. I have a home, a dad who came back for me, a nana who makes the best cookies in the world, and a whole new family that includes our neighbors and friends." There wasn't a dry eye in the gymnasium. Tom felt Nana squeeze his hand as they watched Danny bow to thunderous applause. Mr. Johnson later said it was the most moving performance he'd seen in 20 years of teaching. But the real victory came later that evening when they were adding the day's entry to their journal. Danny wrote, in his careful third-grade handwriting, "Today I learned that my story matters. And that being different isn't bad, it's what makes my story special." The talent show became a turning point in Danny's school life. Classmates who had previously seen him as the new kid began seeking him out at recess, asking to hear more stories. His confidence grew, not just in the classroom but at home too. This newfound confidence led to an unexpected development. During one of Amy's routine visits, Danny asked if he could share their story with other kids in the foster care system. "Maybe it will help them feel less alone," he explained, showing wisdom beyond his years. Amy worked with Tom to arrange visits to local foster care support groups, where Danny would share their journal entries and talk about hope. The impact was immediate and profound. Other children began opening up, sharing their own stories and dreams. Parents in the process of reunification found encouragement in Tom and Danny's journey. One such visit caught the attention of Judge Wilson, who had continued to follow their progress from afar. He invited them to speak at a conference for family court judges, believing their story could help influence how the system approached military family cases. Tom watched with pride as his son, standing on a much bigger stage than the school gymnasium, shared their story once again. Danny spoke about the importance of keeping connections, of never giving up hope, and of building new families that included everyone who helped along the way. During the conference lunch break, Judge Wilson pulled Tom aside. "When Danny ran into my courtroom that day," he said, "I thought I was witnessing a moment of chaos. Instead, I was watching a miracle unfold. You've both turned that miracle into a mission to help others." That evening, as they added another entry to their journal, Tom realized how far they had come from those first uncertain days. Their story had become more than just their own, it had become a beacon of hope for others facing similar challenges. Danny fell asleep that night clutching his talent show participation ribbon, while Tom sat in the living room, adding his own entry to their journal. "Today I watched my son change lives by simply sharing our truth." Sometimes the biggest miracles come from the smallest moments of courage. Winter arrived early that year, bringing with it unexpected challenges. The first snowfall blanketed their neighborhood in white, transforming their familiar streets into a winter wonderland. But along with the beauty came news that would test their family's resilience. Tom received a letter from his former military unit. They were requesting his expertise for a 3-month training program at a base several states away. The position would mean a significant promotion and better long-term opportunities for their family, but it would also mean the first separation since their reunion. When Tom brought up the subject during their evening sharing time, Danny's reaction was immediate and heart-wrenching. The boy's face crumpled, and he pulled his knees up to his chest, making himself as small as possible. "You promised you wouldn't leave again," Danny whispered, his voice trembling. Tom moved to sit closer to his son, wrapping an arm around the small, shaking shoulders. "This would be different, buddy. It's just for 3 months, and we'd video call every single day. Plus, you'd stay here with Nana in our house, keeping everything ready for when I come back." But Danny wasn't ready to be consoled. The next few days were tense, with Danny becoming unusually quiet and clingy. He started asking to sleep in Tom's room, something he hadn't done since those first difficult weeks together. Mrs. Park noticed the change in Danny during their after-school gardening sessions. Even their winter indoor plant project, usually his favorite activity, couldn't lift his spirits. She shared her concerns with Tom one evening when he came to pick up Danny. "Change is hard at any age," she said wisely, but especially when you're young and have already experienced so much loss. That night, unable to sleep, Tom pulled out their journal and began reading through their entries from the past months. Each page reminded him of how far they'd come, the trust they'd built, and the healing they'd achieved together. Could he risk all of that for a career opportunity? The answer came from an unexpected source. During their next visit, Amy Chen brought along a child therapist who specialized in military families. Dr. Rivera spent time with both Tom and Danny, helping them understand their fears and concerns. "Danny," Dr. Rivera said gently during one session, "can you tell me what you think might happen if your dad goes for the training?" Danny's answer revealed the depth of his worry. What if something happens and he can't come back? What if he finds a better place to be? What if he forgets about me? Those words struck Tom like physical blows. But Dr. Rivera helped them develop a plan. Together, they created a special calendar marking off the days until Tom's return. They set up a dedicated tablet for daily video calls, and Danny helped choose special activities he could do with Nana during the separation. Most importantly, they started a new tradition. Each day before Tom would leave, he would write a letter for Danny to open, and Danny would write one for Tom. These weren't just ordinary letters, they were pieces of their hearts, shared across the distance. The decision wasn't easy, but with their support system in place, Tom accepted the position. The day of his departure was emotional, but different from their previous separation. This time, Danny stood tall, wearing the vest from his talent show performance, and handed his father the first letter. "I'm scared," Danny admitted honestly, "but I'm also brave. And I know you're coming back." Those 3 months tested their family in ways they hadn't expected. Some days were harder than others. Danny had moments of sadness, but he found strength in their daily routines and the love of their extended family. Nana moved in temporarily, bringing her familiar comfort and cooking. Mrs. Park continued their gardening projects, now including indoor herbs that Danny could use in cooking with Nana. Mr. Johnson noticed that Danny started writing longer, more detailed stories in class, often about a brave soldier who always found his way home. The other students became invested in these tales, eagerly awaiting each new installment. Tom kept his promise of daily video calls, never missing a single one despite his demanding training schedule. He would listen intently as Danny shared his day's adventures, from the sprouting of new herb seedlings to the latest installment of his classroom stories. The letters they exchanged became treasures. Danny kept his in a special box beneath his bed, often reading them before sleep. Tom carried Danny's letters in his uniform pocket, their presence a constant reminder of home. During one particularly difficult night, when Danny was missing his dad intensely, he pulled out their journal and began writing. "Today was hard, but I remembered what Dad said about courage. It's not about not being scared. It's about being scared but doing what's right anyway. I'm being courageous, just like the soldier in my stories." As the weeks passed, something unexpected happened. Danny's fear began to transform into pride. He started telling his classmates about his dad's important work training other soldiers. During their video calls, he would ask detailed questions about Tom's day, genuinely interested in understanding his father's work. The experience was changing Tom too. Every letter he wrote, every video call he made, reinforced his commitment to balancing his duty to his country with his role as a father. He began developing training protocols that took into account the unique challenges faced by military families, sharing insights from his own experience. Spring was just beginning to paint the world in soft greens when Tom's 3-month training assignment drew to a close. The day of his return was marked on Danny's calendar with a big red star, surrounded by so many excited doodles that the date was barely visible. Danny had insisted on making a "Welcome Home" banner himself, spending hours carefully coloring each letter. Mrs. Park helped him hang it across the front porch, while Nana prepared Tom's favorite lasagna. The house buzzed with anticipation as their extended family gathered to welcome Tom home. But life, as they had learned, rarely follows a perfect script. A severe thunderstorm grounded flights across the region, delaying Tom's return by a day. Danny, who had been counting down the hours, sat by the window watching lightning streak across the sky, his disappointment palpable. "Sometimes," Nana said, sitting beside him with 2 cups of hot chocolate, "the universe makes us wait a little longer for the best things in life." That evening, as the storm raged outside, something remarkable happened. Danny gathered everyone in the living room and pulled out a stack of papers, stories he had written during his father's absence. One by one, he read them aloud, his voice growing stronger with each tale. They were stories of patience, of courage, of family, and of love that could stretch across any distance. Judge Wilson, who had stopped by to welcome Tom home, sat listening intently. He noticed how Danny had woven elements of their own journey into each story: the courthouse scene, the military service, the separations and reunions. But there was something new in these tales, wisdom that could only come from experiencing and processing difficult emotions. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Danny woke up early, too excited to sleep, and rushed to put on the special outfit he had chosen, including the vest from his talent show, which still fit, though a bit snugly now. As he waited on the porch with Nana, a familiar car turned onto their street. The moment Tom stepped out of the car, Danny broke into a run, their reunion mirroring that day in the courtroom so many months ago. But this time, there was no uncertainty, no fear, just the pure joy of a family coming back together. That evening, as their house filled with the warmth of celebration and the aroma of Nana's cooking, Tom noticed something different about his son. Danny carried himself with a new confidence, moving easily between conversations with adults and his young cousins who had come for the celebration. Later, after the guests had gone home and they settled into their familiar spots for their evening sharing time, Danny surprised his father with a gift, a bound collection of all the stories he had written during their separation. "I realized something while you were away, Dad," Danny said, his voice thoughtful. "Our story didn't end in the courtroom. It's still being written every day." Tom's training experience had opened new doors. The military was implementing his suggestions about supporting families during deployments and separations. He had been offered a position developing family support programs, one that would allow him to continue making a difference while staying close to home. The changes weren't just professional. Their 3 months apart had strengthened their bond in unexpected ways. They had learned to communicate more openly, to trust in their love even when they couldn't be together, and to lean on their community when they needed support. One afternoon, about a week after Tom's return, they received a surprise visit from Amy Chen. She carried news that would add another chapter to their story. A support group for military children was being formed in their area, and they wanted Danny to help lead it. "Your stories touched so many people," Amy explained. "Other kids going through similar situations need to hear them. They need to know they're not alone." Danny looked at his father, his eyes shining with purpose. "Can we do it together?" he asked. "Like a team?" Tom smiled, remembering the frightened little boy who had burst into a courtroom less than a year ago. "We're always a team, buddy. Always." The support group meetings became a monthly event, held in the community center near their home. Danny would share his stories, while Tom offered perspective and hope to parents navigating similar challenges. Judge Wilson occasionally attended, remarking how their simple courthouse reunion had sparked a movement of understanding and support for military families in their community. Mrs. Park contributed too, helping create a community garden where group members could work together, planting hope alongside vegetables and flowers. She often said that growing things helped heal hearts, and watching the children tend their plants while sharing their stories proved her right. 1 year to the day after their courtroom reunion, Tom and Danny sat on their porch swing, adding a new entry to their journal. The garden they had planted with Mrs. Park was in full bloom, and the afternoon sun cast long shadows across their yard. The invitation arrived on a warm Tuesday afternoon, printed on heavy cream-colored paper with an official seal. The National Military Family Association wanted Tom and Danny to be keynote speakers at their annual conference in Washington, D.C. Their story, which had started with 2 simple words in a courtroom, was about to reach an even broader audience. Danny sat at the kitchen table, reading the invitation for the 3rd time, his finger tracing the embossed letters. "Dad," he said thoughtfully, "do you think we can make a difference for other families like ours?" Tom paused from preparing dinner, struck by the maturity in his son's question. The past year had brought so many changes, but none more remarkable than watching Danny grow from a scared little boy into a thoughtful, empathetic young person. "I think we already are," Tom replied, sharing a knowing smile with his son. Their local support group had grown to include families from 3 neighboring counties, and Danny's stories had been compiled into a small book that was being shared with military family support centers across the state. Preparing for the conference became a family project. Nana helped Danny pick out a new suit, insisting that a keynote speaker needed to look the part. Mrs. Park worked with him on public speaking techniques, setting up practice sessions in her garden where Danny would present to an audience of flowers and vegetables. The local veterans group, where Tom still volunteered, organized a fundraiser to cover their travel expenses. They were surprised when Judge Wilson matched the amount raised, ensuring they could extend their stay to visit the national monuments. As their departure date approached, Danny experienced a moment of doubt. During their evening sharing time, he confessed, "What if I forget what to say? What if our story isn't special enough for such a big event?" Tom pulled out their well-worn journal, its pages now filled with over a year's worth of memories. "Let's read some of these together," he suggested. They spent the next hour revisiting their journey, the courthouse reunion, their first night in their new home, the talent show, the 3-month separation, and all the small moments in between. "Our story is special," Tom explained, "not because it's unique, but because it's real. It shows other families that hope is worth holding on to, that separation doesn't mean ending, and that love can bridge any distance." The conference center in Washington, D.C. was larger than any building Danny had ever seen. The audience numbered in the hundreds, military families, support organization leaders, and government officials all gathered to hear different perspectives on supporting service members and their children. When it was their turn to speak, Danny walked to the podium alongside his father, clutching a copy of their journal. He took a deep breath, just as Mrs. Park had taught him, and began sharing their story. His voice, clear and confident, carried through the large hall. He spoke about the day in the courtroom, but also about the days that followed, the challenges of rebuilding trust, the importance of their support system, and the power of keeping memories alive through storytelling. Tom added his perspective, discussing the military's role in supporting families and the programs they developed in their community. The response was overwhelming. Families lined up afterward to share their own stories, many with tears in their eyes. Military officials took notes on Tom's suggestions for improving family support services. Publishing representatives expressed interest in turning Danny's stories into a proper book for military children. But the most meaningful moment came when a small boy, about Danny's age when they were first reunited, approached them. His father was currently deployed, and he clutched a well-worn photo of them together. "Your stories make me feel less alone," he told Danny. That evening, in their hotel room, Danny was quiet for a long time, processing the day's events. Finally, he turned to his father. "Remember when I thought I didn't have any talents?" he asked, referring to the school talent show that felt so long ago. "I realized something today. My talent isn't just telling stories, it's helping other people tell theirs." The conference led to unexpected opportunities. The military began implementing family support programs based on Tom's recommendations. Danny's stories were being incorporated into resources for children dealing with deployment. Their local support group model was being replicated in military communities across the country. Back home, life settled into a new rhythm. Danny started a writing club at school, encouraging other children to share their experiences through stories. Tom's work with military families expanded, but he always made sure to be home for dinner and their evening sharing time. Mrs. Park's garden had become a gathering place for their support group families. She taught the children about patience and growth through tending to plants, while parents shared experiences and advice. The garden produced more than vegetables, it grew understanding, friendship, and healing. One evening, as they worked on their presentation for an upcoming speaking engagement, Danny made an observation that stopped Tom in his tracks. "You know what, Dad? When I ran into that courtroom, I thought I was just running to you. But really, I was running toward our whole future, all these people we've met, all the families we've helped, everything we've become together." The letter that changed everything arrived on a crisp autumn morning. Danny's book of stories, lovingly compiled from their experiences and those of other military families, had caught the attention of the Department of Defense. They wanted to distribute it to every military base across the country as part of a new family support initiative. The news came with an unexpected twist. They wanted Danny to help create a series of workshops for military kids, teaching them how to tell their own stories. It would mean traveling to different bases during summer break, working with children whose parents were deployed or recently reunited. "It's a big responsibility," Tom said, watching his son's expression carefully as they discussed the opportunity. "But if anyone knows how to help these kids, it's you." Danny sat quietly for a moment, fingering the worn edges of their original journal. "I remember how scared and alone I felt," he said softly. "If my stories can help even one kid feel less afraid, then I want to do it." The preparation for this new venture brought their community together in unexpected ways. Mr. Johnson helped Danny develop age-appropriate writing exercises. Mrs. Park suggested incorporating gardening activities into the workshops, knowing how working with plants had helped Danny process his own emotions. Nana, ever practical, focused on making sure they were ready for the travel. She sewed special carrying cases for Danny's books and materials, each one embroidered with words from his stories about courage and hope. Judge Wilson, who had become a regular visitor to their support group meetings, offered a unique perspective. "Your story started in my courtroom," he reminded them, "but it's grown far beyond those walls. You're not just helping military families now, you're changing how the entire system views family reunification." Their first workshop was scheduled at a base near their home, allowing them to test their program before traveling further afield. The base commander had arranged for 15 children to attend, all from families experiencing deployment or recent reunions. The morning of the workshop, Danny stood before the group, his heart pounding but his voice steady. "When I was 7, he began, I ran into a courtroom to find my dad. That was just the beginning of our story. Today, we're going to help you start telling your stories." What followed was more powerful than any of them had anticipated. The children, ages 6 to 12, shared their fears, hopes, and dreams through words and pictures. They planted seeds in small containers, just as Danny had done with Mrs. Park, learning how nurturing something growing could help heal their hearts. One little girl, whose mother had been deployed for 6 months, wrote about sending her mom pictures of her school projects. A boy, recently reunited with his father, described the weird feeling of having a parent who felt like a stranger at first. "It gets better," Danny told them, sharing pages from his and Tom's journal. "Sometimes the hard parts of our stories make the happy parts even more special." The success of the first workshop led to more opportunities. As they traveled to different bases, they noticed patterns emerging. Each child's story was unique, but the themes of love, longing, and hope were universal. Tom watched with pride as his son connected with these children, using his own experiences to help them find their voices. Danny had grown into his role naturally, knowing exactly when to share a story, when to listen, and when to simply sit quietly beside someone who needed support. Their program evolved as they learned. They added art therapy sessions, suggested by a counselor at one of the bases. They incorporated video messaging techniques, helping kids create digital time capsules for their deployed parents. Each new element was designed to give military children more ways to express their feelings and maintain connections with their families. Back home, their original support group continued to flourish under Nana's guidance. She sent them regular updates about the families they'd helped, and how those families were now helping others. Mrs. Park's garden had expanded to include a special section where support group members could plant flowers in honor of their deployed loved ones. One evening, during a rare break between workshops, Danny and Tom sat in their favorite spot on the porch swing. The summer air was heavy with the scent of blooming jasmine that Mrs. Park had planted for them. "Dad," Danny said, his voice thoughtful, "remember when you said everyone has talents? I think maybe my biggest talent isn't writing stories or even helping other kids write theirs. Maybe it's showing people that their hard times can turn into something good." Tom pulled his son close, marveling at the wisdom in his words. "You know what, buddy? I think you're right. And you've taught me something too, that sometimes the best way to heal is to help others heal." The impact of their work began to show in unexpected ways. Military families started creating their own support networks, inspired by their model. Children who had attended their early workshops were now leading story circles on their bases, helping newer kids adjust to military life. Judge Wilson reported that their story had influenced family court procedures across the state. Courts were now more considerate of military families' unique circumstances, working to maintain connections during deployments and expedite reunifications when possible. Their journey had come full circle, but it wasn't ending, it was expanding, touching more lives with each passing day. The two words that had echoed through a courtroom years ago, "Daddy's home," had grown into thousands of words, stories, and moments of connection between military families across the country. 5 years had passed since that fateful day in the courtroom. Danny, now 12, stood before a very different audience, the United States Congress. He had been invited to testify before a special committee on military family support, sharing the insights gained from thousands of stories collected during their workshops. The hearing room was packed with legislators, military officials, and families who had been touched by their program. Tom sat in the front row, next to Judge Wilson, who had flown in specially for this occasion. Nana and Mrs. Park watched the live stream from home, hosting a viewing party for their support group families. Danny approached the podium, adjusting his tie, the same one he had worn to their first military family conference years ago. But now, instead of nervous fingers fidgeting with the fabric, his hands were steady as he arranged his notes. "Distinguished members of Congress," he began, his voice clear and confident, "5 years ago, I was a scared 7-year-old who ran into a courtroom looking for my father. Today, I stand before you representing thousands of military children who have their own stories to tell." As Danny shared their journey, he wove in statistics and success stories from their workshops. He spoke about the military bases that had adopted their program, the support networks that had formed, and the changes they'd seen in families who participated. But more importantly, he spoke about hope. "Every child of a deployed parent carries 2 stories," he explained. "The story of separation, which is hard, and the story of reunion, which can be both wonderful and challenging. Our program helps them tell both stories, because both matter." In the audience, Tom noticed several legislators wiping away tears as Danny described the impact of their work. He shared letters from children who had found their voice through the workshops, parents who had learned to bridge the gaps caused by deployment, and commanders who had seen positive changes in military families under their command. After the hearing, they received news that would take their mission even further. Congress was allocating funding to expand their program internationally, reaching American military families stationed around the world. They would be working with military bases across Europe, Asia, and beyond. That evening, back in their hotel room, Danny and Tom celebrated with a quiet moment of reflection, just as they had done so many times before. They pulled out their original journal, its pages now soft with use, its cover worn from countless readings. "Dad," Danny said, running his fingers over their early entries, "do you ever think about how different things might have been if I hadn't run into that courtroom that day?" Tom smiled, remembering the small, desperate boy who had changed everything with 2 simple words. "I think about it all the time, buddy. But you know what? I don't think you just ran into a courtroom that day. I think you ran into your destiny." The next morning, before flying home, they made a special visit to Arlington National Cemetery. They had started a new tradition of leaving copies of their book at military memorials, a reminder that behind every service member's story was a family's story too. As they placed the book near a section of recent veterans, a young woman in uniform approached them. "Are you Danny?" she asked. "My daughter attended one of your first workshops 3 years ago. She was so shy back then, wouldn't talk about her feelings. Now she runs the story circle on our base in Germany." These moments of connection had become more frequent over the years, but they never lost their impact. Each one reminded them of the ripple effect that a single act of courage could create. Returning home, they found their community had organized a surprise celebration. The local veteran center, where it all began, was being renamed the Richards Family Center for Military Support. The ceremony brought together families from across the country who had been part of their journey. Mrs. Park's garden, now a sprawling community space, was in full bloom. Each flower bed was maintained by a different military family, creating a living testament to growth and renewal. Nana, though slowing down with age, still baked cookies for every support group meeting, saying that some traditions were too important to let go. Judge Wilson, speaking at the dedication ceremony, summed up their journey perfectly. 5 years ago, a little boy's love for his father broke all our protocols when he ran into my courtroom. Today, that same love has created protocols that help thousands of families maintain their bonds across any distance. During the celebration, Danny unveiled his newest project, a digital platform where military children around the world could share their stories, connect with others, and access resources for coping with deployment and reunion. It was called 2 Words, in honor of where their journey began. That night, after the festivities had ended and their house was quiet once again, Tom and Danny sat in their familiar spots for their evening sharing time. The tradition had evolved as Danny grew older, but its essence remained the same, a sacred space for honesty, reflection, and love. "You know what I've learned after all these years, Dad?" Danny said, looking out at the garden where their story had taken root and grown. "Those 2 words I shouted in the courtroom, they weren't just about you coming home. They were about all of us finding our way home, wherever and whatever home might be." Tom nodded, understanding the deeper truth in his son's words. Their story had never really been about a single homecoming. It was about all the ways people find their way back to each other, all the words that need to be said, and all the hearts that need to know they're not alone. As the sun set on another day in their continuing journey, they added one more entry to their journal. But this time, they wrote it together, father and son, their words flowing into each other just as their lives had done ever since that remarkable day in the courtroom. "Today, we remember that the greatest stories aren't the ones that end with happily ever after. They're the ones that keep growing, keep touching lives, and keep reminding us that love knows no boundaries, not time, not distance, not even the walls of a courtroom. Every story matters, every voice deserves to be heard, and every heart has the capacity to heal and help others heal too. This is our story, but it belongs to everyone who has ever needed to find their way home."